With this Senate update, I'm Julie Bartke. Calling the current transportation funding system antiquated and inadequate, Governor Mark Dayton announced on Monday his transportation funding plan that would raise roughly $6 billion over the next 10 years. He led the news conference detailing his proposal.
The conditions of Minnesota's highways, roads, and bridges is getting worse. The congestion and travel delays around Minnesota are getting worse. Highway safety in their state is getting worse. Public transit systems in the greater Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area and other of the state's metropolitan areas are becoming more antiquated and inadequate. With an estimated 1 million more people living in Minnesota in 25 years, 800,000 more of them in this metropolitan area, more cars, buses, trucks will be using the same highways, roads, and bridges, increasing their deteriorations and adding still further travel delays. Conditions and congestions will keep getting worse. That's a guarantee. Conditions and congestions will keep getting worse unless and until we do something about it. There's one solution, one real solution to our predicament, and that's to invest more money in repairs, improvements, and modernizations, and the plan that I'll be setting forth today would accomplish that over the next decade. The rest, reordering priorities, greater efficiencies, and value captures, are slogans, not solutions. I think Minnesotans know that this is the situation we face, and I think they're ready to do something about it. No one likes to pay more taxes. No one likes to provide more revenues to the state, but this is for dedicated purposes, for better transportation for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren. One legislator is quoted saying, well, the situation is urgent, but it's not urgent enough. Well, I don't know what not urgent enough means. When it takes longer to commute, when your young kids with driver's training or driver's licenses are less safe driving on the highways, when shoulders are falling off the roads, I don't know what has to become more urgent before people respond. Now, it takes some political courage to tackle this problem and to enact this program, and that's why transportation funding is very difficult to obtain, even when it's urgently needed. You know, what will be remembered in 2 years, next fall's campaigns will be, oh, somebody voted to raise taxes on gasoline or wholesale fee or license tabs renewals, and the projects won't yet be underway. So you got to have the courage and the sense of your responsibility to the future of the state to propose changes that may be harmful to you politically, but are absolutely essential to a better future for most of Minnesota.
Minnesota is at a crossroads. Do we invest in transportation now, or do we wait? And at that point, so suffer the inevitable costs of roads and bridges and a transit system that don't meet our needs now or in the future. And what we decide is going to shape our economic competitiveness for the next 20 years. Rebuilding and improving our transportation system is all about positioning ourselves for future economic success, because Minnesota's roads and bridges and transit systems are really the backbone of our economy. Transportation has traditionally been a bipartisan priority, and for good reason. Republicans, Democrats, rural, suburban, urban, everybody understands the shared benefit of transportation systems that work. So I think one of the questions before us today and before the legislature over the next months as we consider our proposal is, why should Minnesota businesses and the people who work for them support this proposal? Well, first, I would say it's because it is going to reduce congestion. There's a very interesting number that just captures this coming out of Texas A&M University. It says that businesses pay, I think it's $242 million more in costs because of congestion and additional freight costs because of congestion. So that's a very important thing. Second, our proposal is going to improve safety, and this is an important issue all across the state, but particularly in roads like Highway 10, Highway 14, Highway 23 in greater Minnesota. Third, our proposal is going to focus on corridors of commerce, which is really targeting transportation investments that are needed for economic growth. We have done this initiative since 2013, 27 projects. We need to continue that, and our proposal does that. And fourth, I would say that our proposal, it is prudent, it is pragmatic, it is balanced, and it delivers real results. It relies on a steady revenue stream, plus borrowing, plus efficiencies out of the Department of Transportation that are real. It addresses our needs for highway improvements on state highways, but also city and county highways. And it supports transit all across the state, both in greater Minnesota, where it is incredibly important, and also in the metro area. And I think businesses should support this because they know that transit is important to their workers.
Our MnDOT's work in the past 2 years actually confirms much of those findings. We find that we really need to invest as much as $1.5 billion per year on the state system in order to keep it up to standards. Our current revenue forecasts only allow for as much as $900 million, so there is a gap. We're going to see a degradation of the system unless we take action. One of the interesting metrics we find is the cost that these degrading roads have on individual motorists and citizens. There's as much car damage and truck damage that equals approximately $1.2 billion a year. That's $396 per motorist. Also, as the Lieutenant Governor alluded to, the cost of congestion, not just businesses, but to individual citizens, is as much as 34 hours a year locked in congestion. So without further or adequate funding, it affects our counties and our municipalities and townships as well. They are facing the same challenges in terms of lack of funding, lack of indexed funding, and they have to take that major responsibility to take care of those roadways and bridges. Often that puts more pressure and burden onto property taxes. We see this proposal as one that helps relieve some of that burden. But perhaps the most important and key point of the governor's proposal is that it is a long-term approach. Both the idea of a sales tax on gross receipts is a mechanism that helps have an additional tax on fuels go up or down with the cost of energy, which is a larger determinant of construction costs, fuels, asphalts, one of the costs that is part of our system. It is a dedicated fund, dedicated to transportation over a period of time. We found this is a way that we can plan and be able to program prudently the needed investments in a comprehensive way. These funding approaches not only address the problem over the next few years, but over many years, because many of these major projects take years to engineer, and as we know the funding is available, we're able to actually do the work in a more efficient, prudent, and cost-effective manner.
The proposal today before us is for an additional transit funding bill that will add $2.8 billion over 10 years across the 7-county metropolitan area. This investment is absolutely critical for our region to plan for future growth and to remain economically competitive. It is a bold proposal, and you may ask, what will the people of the region and the state of Minnesota get with this additional revenue? This proposal will accelerate a build-out of 20 new transitways, and a transitway includes light rail projects, highway busways, the arterial bus rapid transit routes that are critical for the mobility of our region. And it's important to note that 17 of these corridors are busways. Additionally, the proposal will add 27% to our base bus service over 10 years. Most importantly, we will finally have a fully developed system. That's why we need a stable, dedicated revenue source, and we need it now.
I think another number to look at is if all these proposals are enacted, the average cost to an average motorist is somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 per month, both the increase in registration fee and the sales tax on gross receipts and the fuel tax. That $15, that $180 a year, that is considerably less than the costs on front-end alignments and flat tires and broken rims. So I actually think the arithmetic is not as bold. It's really just prudent, business plan toward what Minnesota needs. And I actually think there's even wilder world-class proposals. This is really a competitive proposal that we think is required to maintain and to reverse the trend of degradation and start that trend going the other direction.
The wholesale price of fuel is the starting point, and I'll go into the detail I think you're asking for. So there's a wholesale price of fuel. On that is the federal gas tax. The Minnesota gas tax is applied at the same point in time. So the distributors, the first distribution after a refinery is where this would be applied. So it would be 6.5% on top of that annual average wholesale price. And so what a consumer sees at the pump includes all of those taxes that had been applied and paid through the distributor.
So have you calculated the pass-through costs to consumers?
So we would anticipate the distributors like this, with this tax, with the gas tax, would pass this on to consumers. So we would expect that they would see it at the pump as well.
And how many pennies would that be?
16, about 6, with the floor, it's about 16.3 cents.
If people can't get to work, if they can't get their kids off to school and to activities, talented people are going to find somewhere to live where they can. If business entrepreneurs and business owners can't get their goods and products to markets without exorbitant delays and costs, they're going to move somewhere or expand somewhere where they can. And you look at what's going on around the country, and you look at the investments that other governors, including Republican governors, are making or proposing to make in increased revenues for highways. We've all come to the same realization. The federal government is not going to be the primary source of the increases that we need for transportation. It's unfortunate. It should be, but it's not. And given the cost of these projects, without additional revenues, and these are state generated but distributed, I think, very broadly, very generously by the Constitution to the counties, the cities, and the townships, we'll have transportation improvement projects going on all over Minnesota, putting over 100,000 more Minnesotans to work, and most importantly, laying the foundation for the future economic growth and social vitality of this state.
Governor Mark Dayton's transportation funding plan, which would raise roughly $6 billion over the next 10 years, closely resembles that of the Senate. However, the House GOP has a vastly different proposal.
What we've got to do is we've got to separate the two conversations that we're having. We have a short-term responsibility of creating a budget within a matter of months. I don't think it's any more apparent than today with your press conference and your fantastic questions that this is a very complex issue that we need time to go through the committee process and reach an agreement on. Even the talk about the sales tax, whether there's a minimum, where does it start out, what is the consumer going to see at the pump? Those are questions that just weren't able to be answered today. In fact, in regard to that, I would suggest instead of a minimum, there should be a maximum. Because of any tax that's out there, that sales tax is going to be the most intrusive to the lowest income people in our state. And that's where it's going to hit hardest. So our plan, absolutely, when we came out with it, suggested that we are prioritizing roads and bridges and infrastructure. We said that we will do that in the short term, but what we are looking forward to is going through the process. We will have Commissioner Zelli in our conference committee, in our committee, in a matter of an hour, where we're going to start the process and go through it step by step so that we can get that agreement that the governor was talking about. The governor said he wasn't really wed to the numbers. He wasn't sure if those were the exact numbers we needed. He wasn't sure if the revenue numbers was what we were needed, and that's all we're asking for. We're not suggesting anything different. We're just asking for time to do this in a responsible way.
Well, you guys have not even agreed on the size of the problem. You're proposing far, far less per year than the governor is, whether it's a tax hike or not.
Correct. Well, the reason we came out with the plan that we did, Pat, is because we wanted to show Minnesota that we will prioritize that. And that's where our dollar funding came in. We even said that we would go to the general fund if need be to raise more revenue for our budget issue this year.
When do you expect to do a long-term transportation plan? Are you looking at that this session, or are you going to need more of that time to figure out the problem?
Don, I think that starts today. It starts today in our committee meeting. As we spoke with Commissioner Zelli several times, I think he understands the process that we're going to take, and he appreciates that, because the sooner we can all get on the same page and reach agreement of what that number is, the quicker we can get to solving the problem.
Well, what do you think the number is? What is the number?
Well, Pat, that's why I'm sitting here telling you that I think it's irresponsible to create a long-term plan if we don't understand and agree with what the need is. We've seen lots of reports. We've seen the TFAC report. We've seen CTIP just came out 2 years ago. They came out and said they were fully funded for a 10-year plan. And now all of a sudden we've got a 0.5% increase on it that would generate $325 million a year. We just on the backs of 2 years ago, $2 billion tax increase. It seems to me that the proposals right now by the governor and by the Senate simply increase revenue without first getting us all around the table to agree on the need.
So you think there is a need though to fix? I mean, do you have any agreement that there needs to be more money in the system?
Sure, I would say on a long-term basis there's a need for the structural formula to be revised and to be more sound.
What about $10 billion over 10 years? Is that just too big a number for you?
That's part of the problem, Mary, because we hear 10 billion, we hear 6 billion, we hear 54 billion. You know, that's the issue, and I think Minnesota really would appreciate the fact that we take a step back, we go through this process so that they can get agreement, they can get all their representatives to agree on the number, and then absolutely we'll talk about funding.
So the MnDOT staff isn't being partisan? Are you saying the MnDOT staff isn't nonpartisan, or do you just?
Oh no, I have full faith in MnDOT. I think MnDOT's doing a fantastic job. I agree that it is absolutely a bipartisan issue, but when they come to our committee and they go through the process, they'll help all of us understand where they're actually at.
Why isn't the study that was finished in December of 12 credible with you?
Well, that's a great question. I would suggest that if that study was credible at the time, the governor had the Senate, he had the House, he had his office, where he could have increased these taxes absolutely in our last session. If everyone thought that report was actually the gold standard, then we actually would have had the increases, and I think you'd all agree on that. But something was there that suggested we needed more time, and that's what we're asking for today.
Well, the governor's plan, I think, is a great plan. I think it's honest, it's straightforward, it really gets to the investments that we need to make. You know, we have a roadway system that's aging. It's not going to become any easier to do this work as time passes. We've been hearing from the business community that they need these improvements so that we can get people to their jobs and goods to market, and we know that 1 million people are going to be in the metropolitan area and all over the state within the next 20 years or so. Folks are going to need to get around. So it's a great package, and it's very, very similar to my package. That's not a surprise because, of course, there's been a lot of analysis, a lot of science that goes into really figuring out what the need is and what the gaps are.
There's still a lot of controversy over a gas tax increase, whether it's the wholesale level or right at the pump. So do you think you can get the House on board with any kind of a gas tax increase?
Well, you know, I wake up every day with a sense of renewed hope and optimism. I wouldn't be doing this work if I wasn't optimistic. So absolutely, I think if we engage Minnesotans in the conversation about what these investments really mean in terms of improving their lives, in terms of shared prosperity, economic competitiveness, fixing our roads so we avoid car repairs, fixing our roads so we avoid congestion, doing transit improvements with sales tax in the metropolitan area so we avoid building ever wider interstate freeways that are even more expensive to get folks around. I think, you know, if Minnesotans really engage with their elected representatives, we can absolutely do this.
Finally, the governor stressed it was key to provide sustainable income, dedicated revenue for transportation going into the future. Your plan does the same. The Senate Republicans are saying, well, maybe there needs to be more general fund dollars, and there doesn't necessarily need to be any kind of a tax increase. Is that possible?
Well, if we were to just do a one-time general fund expenditure, it'd be over in a year. We will have built maybe a couple of bridges and about 30 miles of roadway, and then it's done. This is an issue that has been in the making for many, many years, and clearly we need to be building our roadways and fixing our bridges and building out our transit systems for the future. And just a one-shot deal, 1 year, it's just not going to get the job done. This is about an investment that is a return on the dollars that we put in, and it's about setting ourselves up for the future. The way the generations before us did for us, it's our turn now to do that.
You believe you can come up with a plan that does not include new taxes, but does solve the problem. The governor said essentially he wants specifics. Do you have any specifics right now?
Yep, we're still working on pulling that together, and sometime the first part of February, Minnesotans will get a chance to hear a little bit more about that. But it does, and I'm sure no surprise to you, it involves existing revenue. You know, we raise taxes by $2.1 billion. We have a $1 billion surplus, and it's really unfortunate. And I was sorry to see the only solution that the governor can offer is to the minute middle-class families see gas prices come down and have some relief. The only solution the governor and the majority leader in the Senate Transportation Committee can offer is new revenue and higher gas taxes.
The key coming from that announcement was that this would provide sustainable new revenue 10 years into the future and further. So would yours do the same if it's just using existing revenue?
Well, it's important to note our economy is improving, and every year the economy improves. Guess what? We collect more income taxes, we collect more sales taxes, which all contribute to the economy. For example, right now, the license tab fees, which the governor is asking for a very large increase in our license tabs, have increased just from last year to this year because of the improving economy. Our approach will be a little bit shorter because we believe as the economy continues to improve, we do not want to collect money that the state does not need. That's exactly what happened last year. We collected too much money as state government. We took money that was not needed for this budget, and that's exactly what's happening with Governor Dayton's plan.
When you referenced existing revenue, does that include general fund dollars?
Yes, it would. The sales tax, for example, on everything to do with auto repairs and vehicles is something that makes sense to Minnesotans. We ought to be taking that sales tax and collecting it for construction of roads and bridges. That's an existing revenue stream that is going into the general fund now that we would just simply ask to move to roads and bridges.
Finally, Senator, as a member of the minority in the Senate, are you working closely with the majority in the House to try to parlay a bill that reflects your priorities as well?
Well, certainly we have talked, but the House has their ideas. We have our ideas. As you know, in the Senate, we do not control the discussion. In the Senate Transportation Committee, our job there is to make sure Minnesotans that oppose the new revenue and their voice is heard in the Senate Transportation Committee. But yes, transportation is something that all Minnesotans can agree on as a priority, and we're certainly willing to work with the House in a plan that moves that forward.